Welcome back to Conversate with Akeem D, Earle. And we have another very special guest, guys. But before we get into that, please like and subscribe to the podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast. Please subscribe. And on YouTube, most of my content is going on YouTube. You get the video, you get the audio, you get the different clips. So if you want all the Conversate content, type in Conversate with Akeem D, Earle on YouTube, subscribe, and you get all the great content. And when you do that, it allows me and the podcast to grow and to give you and to bring you dope guests like I'm about to bring you right now. It is my guy, Adam. He graduated from the Boston University and then also graduated from the University of District of Columbia, David A. Clark School of Law, which is where I met him and found out this is probably the smartest guy I know. He graduated summa cum laude. We were on mock trial together. We had different classes together. And then even after law school, we worked together in DC as prosecutors. And I just felt like this guy is too good of a talent, too good of a treasure not to share with my audience. Please welcome my guy, Sadick, to the podcast. Adam Sadick, Esquire. Welcome, bro.
Thank you. I appreciate it, King. Thank you for that introduction. That's very, very kind of you. I appreciate it.
I had to.
Thank you. It feels good. It feels good to finally be on. I've been following the podcast for a while. We got a lot of mutual connections that have come on here. I'm glad it's finally my turn. I'm really happy to be here today. Happy to talk. And thank you again for that very kind introduction.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I was just saving. I had to save this for a couple episodes in because I think we're gonna get into a lot of good stuff, and it'll be great for the audience to hear. So the reason why Adam is on, because this guy is a historian, he's a financier, he's a international relations genius, and we're gonna get to the nitty gritty of just what's going on with Iran, what's going on in Israel, what's going on with the U.S., all these international relations, and just to get a better understanding and to bring to the audience some understanding of what's going on. And Adam does a great job of breaking this down. But before we get into all of that, we're going to get to know Adam. So Adam, the first official question of the Conversate podcast is, if I was not an attorney, I would be a what?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Mm-hmm. I think my answer to this question has probably evolved over time. I would say, but at heart, before I was an attorney, I was a linguist. Languages, foreign languages, has just always been something of a gift of mine. I think I inherited that from both of my parents, who were interpreters and translators from Arabic to English, English to Arabic. And I just, foreign languages was something that was always just kind of, not to humble brag. It was talk. It was always just kind of effortless to me. Like I just kind of, my brain just kind of understands the way languages work. And, I think it hits the right balance. Being a translator, being a linguist in general would hit the right balance of, something that I'm good at, something that I enjoy, something that wouldn't necessarily feel too, onerous and like, they say pick a job that doesn't necessarily feel like work to you. Translating when I was a translator, it would be fun for me. Like it was kind of an adventure. Like for instance, I'd stumble across a phrase in Arabic that just, if you were to translate it literally, would just be gibberish in English. But finding out what that phrase means and looking at the actual meaning and coming up with an analogy in your target language, English, is fun. It's kind of like solving a puzzle.
Man.
So it's what the future of being a linguist and a translator are like in the era of AI and all that remains to be seen. I'm still skeptical. I think that you need humans to perform that role for a number of reasons. But to get back to your question, if I were not a lawyer, I think I would definitely be a translator.
I forgot to add that to your intro. I'm gonna add linguist to the next. I forgot about it. That's facts. While other people see it as like something so difficult and something you have to like, because for me, Spanish class was a drag. I'm like, oh my gosh, I gotta learn these conjugations. But to hear that you saw it as a puzzle, I never saw language like that, because it always just seemed like something I needed to repeat over and over in my mind until I knew how book translated to Spanish. Like I just keep repetitions, colors, animals. But for you said it seems like a puzzle. How is it a puzzle in terms of like, if you just don't know what the translation is, like, how do you approach it like a puzzle?
Well, therein is the puzzle, right? So I mean, like so for instance, like let's say I have an idiom, like let me just give you an example. in Arabic, if you want to say someone is, well, before I give you the meaning in English,
Yeah.
in Egyptian Arabic, you would say Demmu Taqil. Demmu Taqil literally means his blood is cold. Now, like I was saying, if you translate that literally into English, that has no meaning to an English speaker. Well,
Right.
It would be nothing for me to say. Right. It is very poetic. It's very metaphorical.
Yeah.
But for instance, be like, well, wait a second, like, but when you dig into the meaning and in Arabic, it will. Sorry, I'm not really directly answering your question here, but like to give you like
this is good.
To give you a taste of like what the reasoning is like. Well, so in Arabic, the word the word for cold is ta'il. In formal Arabic, it's taqil. It has a different connotation in Arabic versus English. In English, we associate cold and cool with like it's a quasi negative, right? Like if someone is cold or their demeanor is cool, it's not necessarily a good thing outright. But in Arabic, it's the opposite. Cold is good. And there's a reason when I was studying Arabic in college, I said it's because Arabic originated in the deserts of Arabia, and where something being cool wouldn't necessarily be a good thing because you're in the desert, But getting back to your question, like you really just have to explore like the language and expose yourself and see what these different words mean in different contexts, and eventually with enough exposure, you will see that Demmu Taqil means that he's a chill guy. He's relaxed. He's funny. He's charismatic. His
blood is cool. His blood is cold. That's how cool he is.
Actually, technically, I just found an error that I made. Forgive me. But Demmu Taqil technically is the opposite. I was trying to say Demmu Khafif. It means his blood is light, which means he's easygoing, charismatic. He's not uptight. If you were to say Demmu Taqil, it means his blood is heavy, and that kind of has the opposite. It's like, oh no, he's gruff. He's unapproachable. He can't take a joke. So, but again, like you can't just look at the words and figure out that that's what that means. You wouldn't be able to. You have to
context, culture.
Exactly. You have to understand the context. You need the cultural exposure. And that's to me, it's almost like a game. And in doing so, you learn a lot about the culture. In a way, the culture is behind both languages. Like I was just explaining about like what the word cool means in that context and how it's different in English. So that whole process is just kind of fun to me.
Nah, you just made it sound mad fun. Like the audience has got a whole language lesson. And now that's facts. I might start using it. If somebody's doing too much, I'm like, yo, your blood is heavy right now. Be like,
chill your blood out for a second.
Your blood is a little too heavy right now. Keep it light, man. Don't beat the Eid, man. All right, so
decent pronunciation,
right? So you also do some translation on your job, which leads me to not a linguist. How did you become a lawyer? What led you to practice law instead of become a linguist?
So it was a complicated journey. It definitely wasn't. I just woke up one day and I'm like, I think I'll be an attorney.
Yeah.
To give you a little bit of background, as I mentioned, I used to be a translator, an interpreter, and an analyst. When I got out of college, I worked for a small consulting firm doing analysis and translation of like what they call open source Arabic language material. If they want to know what one person or one group or what one country, whatever is up to, I would look at certain media outlets, statements made by government officials, this, that, and the other, translate them and put them together in like reports for managers to do with that information what they will. And while I was in that process, thank you. I was also in the process of being recruited by a defense firm to be an Arabic translator. And I was in the process of getting a security clearance. And when in the middle of that, well, I guess towards the end, and I guess you could say a lot of things happened that just totally changed the trajectory of my career and in my life. And one, my father unfortunately passed away. This was January 2017, and he was, he was. I don't want to say like, I don't want to make it sound like I'm a nepo baby, but like I relied on him a lot for professional contacts and guidance.
Sure.
In some ways, he was kind of grooming me to be an Arabic interpreter and translator like
what dads
him.
are supposed to do, supposed to pass
Exactly,
that information
exactly.
and set their child up for success. That's exactly what he was doing. Yeah,
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly. Thank you. And we were kind of applying to similar jobs around the same time. And unfortunately, he wasn't. We ran into the same problem. Neither of us got this security clearance that we needed, even though he had a high level security clearance for years prior. And then unfortunately, he passed away in January 2017, and that just kind of upended my life. I all of a sudden, I inherited this house of his that we needed to pay a mortgage on. I at the time was in between jobs. It was pretty scary and just kind of totally, realign my priorities.
For sure.
And also, I want to be careful with too much of what I say here, but I also had sort of an ethical, moral, political reawakening, you could say. I started to kind of reconsider the work that I was doing, who my work would be for, who it would be benefiting, who it might potentially be harming. And without, getting too much into the details, I mean, if you're an Arabic translator in the Washington, D.C. area, if you want to make decent money, there are but so many employers you can work for. And in that time, like I said, I kind of had this political reawakening. I learned about things that I didn't know about, and I exposed myself to certain worldviews that I hadn't seen or understood before. And that just made me question the work that I was doing, whether I wanted to do it for the people that, would be providing the work. I mean, if you are an Arabic translator, let's be real. I mean, most of the work they're going to be, the best opportunities you're going to be find are in the defense and intelligence sector. Right. And I just couldn't stomach working in that field anymore, morally and ethically. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but that was one thing. I'm just like, I can't do this. That to kind of dovetail with that, I also kind of understood things, and part of my thinking was looking at American foreign policy. Like, honestly, like a lot of what we are doing overseas, I have very strong disagreements with, and I just didn't necessarily want to be a part of, that system, you might call it.
So we're going to get into that. No, you're good. We're going to get into that. And I think that's so important for you to say, because there's a lot of people who go through different transitions in their life and don't know how to pivot. You went through two big transitions. You went through the passing of your father, and then the giving up of a career because you had, like you said, a political or moral reawakening. Those are two huge transitions. And now the trajectory of your life, like you said, is completely changed. There's a lot of people who that has happened to, and they feel lost, or they're currently in that and they have no clue where to go next. How did you make those pivots from those two things?
So that's a fantastic question. So I, getting back to like my, political beliefs and stuff, around that same time, I also got exposed to certain beliefs that I hadn't necessarily, seen or heard before. And this was around the time of, the Bernie Sanders campaign. And I was just, for instance, issues such as income inequality, I wasn't necessarily aware of before. Some of the inherent flaws of what we refer to as the capitalist economic model, I wasn't aware of. Again, some of the things the United States is doing overseas, our foreign policy, I wasn't necessarily aware of. So all of this kind of came together at the head, and I'm like, well, listen, what can I do? What career can I look for where I feel like I'm acting on my beliefs, and I don't need to compromise, and I don't need to pick a lesser of two evils, or just kind of sideline my moral and ethical compass. And where I feel like the work is rewarding, and where I feel like, I may be good at it.
Yeah.
And I kind of, for better or for worse, I decided that the law would be a good, juncture of all of those factors. Specifically, I wanted to get into the substantive area of law that I wanted to get into was, some labor and employment, because for me, that is just, there's a lot of issues that we face in public life, but just living and working and surviving under this system that we all live on, to me, that's paramount. I mean, you and I and people who work for a living, we are going to spend, by the time we're dead, we will have spent most of, like, not for everybody, for most of us, we will have spent most of our life, sitting at a desk working on behalf of an employer for a wage, and 48 hours of free time on the weekend, and maybe some good benefits if you're lucky. And maybe some retirement, if Wall Street doesn't gamble your life savings away and you live long enough to make it to live a life of dignity and freedom. And so I really kind of convinced myself that, being just this sort of social justice warrior in the field of labor and employment would kind of meet those factors that I was talking about. It's something that work that would feel good to me. I can feel good about it. I feel like I'm making a difference. I'm maybe good at it. And so law school that seemed like a logical next step for me.
Yeah.
Over the years, I don't want to jump into a new subject. Over the years, my evaluation of the of that kind of changed.
Yeah.
But I have no regrets. I mean, being an attorney is a rewarding profession. It's challenging. Obviously, I met you. I met my wife. I'm now a father because I went to law school.
Facts.
And so that's the main thing that brought me to the law, to answer your question.
No, that's good. That's real. So let's get into it. So everything you broke down in terms of like society, capitalism, the system set up. The number one question I have for you is, why should we care? Especially with everything going on with international relations, with the society, everything's going on. I'm thinking about that single mom who's taking her child to work. She got to wake up at 9:00 and she turns on the news, whatever, and she sees everything's going on in media. She still got to take her child to school. She still got to pay for groceries. She still got to do all these things. Iran and all these other things is like low on the list. Like, why should we care what's going on in the world?
It's a fantastic question, and it's a complicated one, and it's not that straightforward to answer. But my take would be this: first off, separate and apart from any your material reality and how what's going on in Iran or Israel elsewhere affects your day-to-day life. I mean, you and I, we may disagree as to whether or not the United States is a democracy or how government works, but at the end of the day, we do have a representative system of government, and whether we like it or not, whether or not we can change this or affect in any way, we are responsible for what we are morally and ethically responsible for what our politicians do overseas. If we invade Iraq and kill 250,000 people and destroy the place and displace millions, I mean that's we are morally responsible for that because we have some degree of control over what our politicians do. Again, we can debate as to how much control but at the end of the day, when politicians do things like this, when they act overseas, they're doing so in our name. So it's incumbent upon, I believe that it's incumbent upon us to be aware of what our government is doing overseas. And second of all, affect it in a way that, mitigates harm. So I think we have a moral responsibility to do that. Again, when you're, like you said, a single mom who's taking care of kids, working a job, that may not necessarily rise to the top of your priorities, but for me personally, I think it's important. Now, when I began my answer by saying, separate and apart from your material reality, I mean, like this, we may or might not feel like this affects our quality of life, how much money is in our pocket, but incidentally, it kind of does. I mean, like if, for instance, the United States decides to go to war wherever, I mean, that is money that our government is spending on bombs, on weapons, on military contractors, on logistics, on this, that, and the other that is not being spent on social programs. It's, classic guns and butter. If we just simply ignore what our government is doing and let them, go to war or do this, that, and the other overseas without any oversight, without any check, I mean, this is what happens. War, just speaking narrowly about war, war is a very profitable industry for defense contractors, for the banks, insurance companies that fund and underwrite them, for private equity. I mean, there's a book written by a general by the name of Smedley Butler, I believe in the 1930s, where he gets into this. The title of the book is called "War is a Racket," and I mean, I don't want to get too sidetracked, but it's important to know about this, because if we're not careful, if we don't resist, if we don't stand up for our own needs, like this single mother who's trying to raise a kid, she's worried about childcare, she's worried about her wages, she's worried about the cost of rent, interest rates, the cost of borrowing. Like, I mean, those problems get worse when we divert so much resources to war, and things like that. So those, I would say those are the 2 points that I would raise if someone says something like, why should I care? It's a moral issue, and it's a material issue, in my opinion.
And so, speaking of war, what constitutes a war? Because I feel like we've been screaming that it's about to be World War III for like for 10 years. Like there's been many different instances where we say, oh, this is about to be World War III, but there's never been a label of World War III. And I also know that only Congress can like declare war on these different things. And we very well could have had multiple wars, but we just didn't label it World War III.
Right.
What constitutes, like, what is it going to take for, I don't know, media or politics to say this is World War III? Not to say I want it, but like, when does something get that label?
Well, that's a complicated question to answer. There's a lot of considerations in mind. Right. Getting back to you're taking your points in reverse order. So about the media, how the media frames issues, that's a very much we could have a whole talk about that.
That's true. Yeah.
But to answer the meat and potatoes of your question, I mean, what would constitute war? I mean, in legal terms, I mean, any act of aggression, any military action, in my opinion, is war or an act of hostility. I mean, if the president just decides to bomb, I don't know, in Islamic State or an Al Qaeda base in the mountains of Pakistan, the border regions of Pakistan, Afghanistan, that is war. You know, the exchange that we recently saw the last few weeks between Israel and Iran. I mean, you could argue that's very much a war. They were firing weapons at each other. It was large scale destruction of military and civilian targets. You could say that's a war. I mean, it depends. But if we're talking about World War III, I think that's very much going to be, you know, you'll know when you see it.
You'll know.
If there's, you know, if we
know
have
World War III when you look up and the skies is littered with.
Exactly. I mean, it's not all about the scale of violence and destruction, but I think that's, if we're saying, oh, this is a world war, then that's certainly a big factor. I mean, you look at both the world wars. I mean, you had several different nations involved. I mean, there was just tens of millions of casualties, large scale destruction. I mean, Europe was totally destroyed in World War II. Japan was totally destroyed. The Soviet Union was totally destroyed. So much so that the United States, by 1945, in one form or another, controlled about half the world's wealth because we were, for the most part, just not touched by the war.
Jeez.
But I think if and again, we're talking about, to a certain extent, in answering this question of what would World War III look like, we're also kind of predicting human behavior, which is very difficult to do. I mean, if the United States were to invade Iran and put boots on the ground, I don't know how likely it would be, but I mean, the risk would just be, the risk of a broader war breaking out, I think, would be extremely high, extremely dangerous, such that, you know, that shouldn't even be an option in our minds, you know. But World War III, if and when it does happen, I think it will be instantly recognizable. And unfortunately, I think it will probably be the last war. I mean, we have nuclear weapons now. We have thermonuclear weapons. We have the hydrogen bomb. We have missiles that can go, you know, pretty much around the world. If a war of that scale does break out, would be very dangerous. Will be the last humanity. One. Yeah, I hate to say it, but it's you know, the prospects of humanity surviving would, in my opinion, be very slim. And I don't think there would be. I don't know how you could have organized human life if a nuclear war does break out. But. So sorry, that's not exactly a rosy answer.
That's an amazing answer. That opens up so many different things. And there's a bunch of movies that depict this, like the ending of this, like stop the war from happening, because if China releases theirs and the US releases theirs and France releases theirs, everybody's getting wiped out. It feels like there's no middle ground. There's no like a half war. Like I'm gonna release 3, but that's it. I ain't gonna release the whole arsenal. I'm not gonna do world destruction. But it feels like once that button is pushed, everybody's pushing the buttons, and we releasing everything.
Exactly.
It's like the extreme.
Yeah. And I mean, one, you know, recently, I don't know, you know, folks were paying attention to this, but you know, there was sort of a dust up between, that's a not really appropriate word to use, but there was a confrontation between Pakistan and India recently, where I believe there's some militant groups conducted an attack on civilians, on tourists in the region of Kashmir in India, which is part of Pakistan. It was occupied by India. Well, it's not part of Pakistan, but anyway, India is illegally occupying the region of Kashmir, and a separatist militant group carried out a large terrorist attack, and the Indian government, which is it's ruled by an extreme right-wing nationalist movement. The name of the party is the BJP. It's led by the current Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who's extreme anti-Muslim bigot. he essentially sees this as an opportunity to attack Pakistan. I mean, his line was kind of similar to the line that you heard out of Israel. He's like, oh, we're attacking terrorist targets, terrorist infrastructure. But a lot of what they were hitting was civilian targets, and there was an exchange of fire on both sides. I mean, those are two nuclear powers. That is exactly what you don't want to happen. Like, for instance, if what happened between India and Pakistan, I mean, that's dangerous enough. But imagine, say, if that were to happen between Russia and the United States, or Russia and France or Great Britain, which is a nuclear power. I mean, that's like, just the risk is just too great. The risk of harm and the severity of the harm is so great that you don't even want to risk even a small scale conflict between two nuclear powers. And actually, if your listeners are interested, there's a group called the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, and they have this thing. I think around the Cold War, they came up with this thing called the Doomsday Clock, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a sort of a metaphor. It's a clock. It's a metaphor that essentially measures how close humanity is to terminal nuclear war. And every so often, based on certain events that happen around the world, they adjust it. The most recent adjustment was in January of this year. That was before the Iran-Israel conflict. And I think the clock is at 90 seconds to midnight. If the clock hits midnight, then it's like, okay, we're finished. Like, nuclear war is imminent. That's it. It's game over. We are now 90 seconds to midnight.
Wait, what is that in like actual time? Like, what do you mean 90 seconds to, like, it can't be 90 till midnight tonight. Like, what do you mean 90 seconds to midnight?
Right, so it's like metaphorical, right? So let's say 11:01 would be like, okay, there's no real risk of nuclear war, nothing really to worry about. There's world peace. Da da da. Midnight is nuclear war is happening right now, or it's imminent, and the prospects are very bad. So the closer you are to midnight, the more likely or the more imminent terminal nuclear war is. So by moving the clock to 90 seconds to midnight, they're basically like, shit.
A minute and a half.
Yeah, literally. And I'm sure, I don't think there's been an adjustment since, but since what happened with Pakistan and India, and then with Iran and Israel, if they haven't already, I would be shocked if they don't plan on moving that closer, maybe 60 seconds to midnight.
So like 11:59 to, my God.
Yeah.
And who did you say? Who did you say on this clock?
It's called the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists.
Okay.
And they basically, I don't know too much about them outside of this Doomsday Clock, but I know they are a group of atomic scientists. They put out sort of like what you might call op-eds, like analyzing global affairs every so often, particularly as it relates to like the risk of nuclear war, uranium enrichment, things like that. But this was kind of like, for me at least, this was like their big thing. It was like this Doomsday Clock.
That's crazy.
So if you're interested, definitely take a look. I mean, they've done some interesting work over the years, but that is definitely like what really, to me at least, that's their main contribution.
Yeah. Man,
and again, but again, I'm no expert by any.
Oh no. Listen,
I just know them for that.
That's real. So you spoke about predicting human behavior in terms of deciding whether or not there will be a war, and history does repeat itself. So we talk about the conflict in Iran, and they're saying they have been curating nuclear weapons, and we need to stop it before it comes out. We've seen it before with Iraq. There was a similar narrative around Iraq, and I mean, obviously, World War III didn't break out then. Do you think it has to do with just the level of superpower that these different countries are? Like, we can pick on an Iran or a smaller country because they not like they don't got it like we got it. So does that matter into like scale? Like we talked about Pakistan and India. Does it matter in scale of like what the driving force behind these things are?
Oh yeah, I think there's definitely an element to that, and that's certainly there's an element of that's at play, and that's certainly a factor. When countries just decide to go to war, can we get away with it? That's certainly a factor. Like you mentioned Iraq, and Iraq was, of course there was rhetoric about them developing a nuclear program. Turned out to be total bullshit. But that if Iran had nuclear weapons, for instance, they had a deterrent, the Iraq war never would have happened. But Iraq was a relatively weak third world country, developing nation. They had been under sanctions since the Clinton years. And I think it's estimated that the sanctions regime that we put in place, which, again, when we put sanctions on a country, that's targets their civilian populations, basically saying we're going to make life miserable for the population of this country in the hopes that they overthrow their government and put in power a movement or government that does what we want them to do, essentially. And there's it's impossible to say for sure, and I can't put myself into the head of George W. Bush and Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney. I can't tell you why exactly they went to war. But I mean, yeah, I think that if Iraq had been a much stronger country, and if they had more of a deterrent, or if perhaps if they had closer relations with Russia and China, that may have affected the United States' desire to invade and occupy the country. Now, Iran is in a slightly different situation. Iran is a much bigger country than Iraq. They also have much closer relations with Russia and China. So, the threat of a broader conflict breaking out is much higher with Iran than it would have been with Iraq. I mean, Iraq was relatively isolated at the time, in part due to the sanctions regime that we put on them, but they were definitely sort of a pariah state. Didn't have anywhere near the influence that Iran does today, regionally and internationally. So for that reason, yeah, I mean, I think the risk of a nuclear war breaking out would be significantly higher if we were to go full on war with Iran than Iraq. But back to your original question, yeah, I mean, a country's ability to defend itself is always a relevant factor in whether a country decides to go to war or not. And I mean, let's be real. I mean, the United States that the ability to make war and to destroy and to engage in organized violence, that is the U.S.'s biggest competitive advantage. I mean, we spend more on the military than the next, it's like 8 or 9 countries combined. We have, and we don't know for sure because a lot of this is classified. They simply just don't tell the public. But I mean, we have close to 1,000 foreign military bases around the world. We have close to 50,000 nuclear warheads. I think Russia is the only country that comes close to the number of nuclear warheads that we have. So, I mean, war is very much a part of our foreign policy. And it's, sorry, I kind of lost where I was going with this. But that's definitely, the U.S. has no trouble throwing its weight around for sure.
Yeah.
If it comes to fisticuffs, there's not very many countries that could even remotely stand a chance, like in the military. That's why, I mean, other folks have different takes on this, but like the U.S. tends to prefer to keep disputes with other countries in the arena of force. Like, oh no, diplomacy, whatever. Let's just fight it because you have no shot at beating us.
I'm gonna bully you.
Yeah, we're just gonna destroy your country.
I don't want to talk. I'm gonna put my foot on your neck.
For better, that's not every conflict is like that, but like if you look at the tendencies, I mean, that's our comparative advantage. No other country can really compete in with us like that.
No, that's real, because that's what leads to my next question is like, how did we get to this space? Maybe it connects back to the Cold War when everybody was like pump faking, like, oh, I'm gonna have a nuclear weapon. But like, why? How did it come to this where we have to stock up on the biggest weapons to survive in this world? And I don't know. I don't want to be on some like kumbaya, like why can't we just all hold hands and get along? But how did it come to the doomsday clock? How did it come to 50,000 warheads? How did it come to us spending all this money of military to a point where if we push a button, all life is wiped out? Is this necessary? Like, and again, I guess it goes back and it connects to the underlying question of like, what is the purpose behind it? What is the motivation behind a bombing in Iran, the Israel conflict? What is the goal? Like, where are we trying to get to as a country, as a nation, as the world? Like, what is the purpose behind all this? If you could give your opinion on that. Yeah.
Right. No, of course. So, I mean, obviously there are different schools of thought and people's political and moral beliefs may influence, what sort of camp they fall in. But my take is this, and there are a number of, there's no one single factor, no one reason. But to answer your question, I would take us back to World War II. Like what I was saying earlier, the United States was basically untouched by World War II. The only parts of the United States that were really seriously damaged, to my knowledge, was, I mean, Pearl Harbor and Hawaii. And Hawaii wasn't even a state then. It wasn't even part of the United States. It was a colony that we had just recently stolen from the Hawaiians in 1898.
Mm-hmm.
And it was mostly the military installations.
Mm-hmm.
But by the end of the war, as I mentioned, approximately half of the world's wealth was in American hands or under American control, because the rest of the developed world, the rest of the rich countries, I mean, they were totally destroyed. Hitler basically wiped out the Soviet Union. Europe was destroyed by the Allied bombing campaigns. France, Great Britain, the Netherlands, all these Italy, all these countries were just, I mean, their GDP was wiped out. And so now here you have this massively rich and powerful country controls half the world's wealth. It's just no parallels in history. I mean, you talk about the Roman Empire, nothing comes close to the degree of wealth and power and security that the United States had after World War II. And I think that, it was the priority of American planners in the post-war period to keep conditions the way they were. Keep America top dog, keep as much of the world's wealth in our hands as possible, and crucially, just maintain America's military dominance. And I mean, there's no, you're not allowed to really say this in polite society, but that's, it's imperialism. We're an empire. We want to be in control of the global economy. We want to have, unrivaled strength. We want to be able to throw our power around. And again, I say we, it's not you and me, right? I mean, international relations, foreign policy, it's not monolithic, right? I mean, it's largely how a country acts with other countries is largely determined by the internal distribution of power in that country, right? And so look at the United States, how is power distributed here in the US? I mean, do you and I control the country? No, of course not. To a large degree, policy is made and driven by concentrated wealth and power. Multinational corporations, financial institutions.
But we have power in our vote. We have power in the ballot, right?
That's what they would love you to believe, right? And we can definitely get into that.
That's a whole other conversation. Yeah, I
had to
squeeze that in there.
But to get back to your question, I mean, that's basically what it is. I mean, our foreign policy is controlled by, interests that want to maximize and preserve their power and wealth as much as possible, and they will use state power to do that, right? And actually, coming back to Iran, this is a perfect segue, right? In 1953, Iran was a parliamentary democracy, right? They had a Shah who was kind of like, his power was
real quick, parliamentary democracy. Explain that in like 2 seconds. Yeah.
Well, so they had, an executive, what you might call an executive in the Shah and a prime minister. But you also had a parliament and you had a judicial system. And it was, at least on paper, more or less function not too dissimilarly to the US and Europe. I mean, they had a parliament, parliament passes laws, they have elections, etc. And that's basically the system was in place in 1953. What happened in 1953? In 1953, technically in 1951, a very conservative nationalist movement came to power that ended up being led by a man by the name of Muhammad Mossadegh, or we know him as Mossadegh in English, who was a bit of a reformer. He was conservative, but he was a reformer. And his big sticking point was that he wanted to nationalize Iran's energy sector in order to pay for, primarily to give the country control over its resources, but also to fund, to finance reform, social reform, things like that. Because at the time, Iranian oil was being exploited by what became British Petroleum, BP. At that time, it was known as the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, I believe. But it was dominated by the British, right? And so what he ended up doing in 1953 was he nationalized what would become BP. So the Iranian state took control over BP's operations in Iran, so that they can control the profits and everything. And that was a big no-no. There's how do I say this? I mean, look, like Europe was very much in its empire phase then. I think that the United States also very much in its empire, the beginning, the height of its imperial phase. So if someone comes around and says, actually, our natural resources aren't going to benefit New York and London and shareholders over there, we want them to benefit the Iranian people. That's a problem, okay? Because like I was saying before, I mean, the goal of American policy was to just keep essentially control over the global economy to the greatest extent possible. So when people come around and say, actually, no, we want to control our own resources and we want to control our country's destiny, we want to be in control of policy, that's a problem.
Like that.
Exactly. So basically, to make a long story short, the CIA carried, in cooperation with the British intelligence, carried out a coup, basically empowered an Iranian generals to overthrow the government, and that obviously put nationalization plans on hold. And what ended up happening is that the Shah of Iran became like an absolute monarch, just total dictatorial powers, and his regime lasted from 1953 until 1979. It was one of the most brutal regimes in the history of the Middle East. I mean, torture, abduction, just total suppression of democracy and human rights, just rank corruption, theft of the country's resources, just horrific, like extravagance, so the kind that we associate with modern Middle Eastern dictators. But none of that matters because he obeyed orders from Washington. He's our guy, so it's totally fine. But we're willing to look the other way. That's sort of that's I would cite that as an example of some of the things that the actions that the United States took and is taking to maintain the status quo. Obviously, things materially are different. I mean, the United States does not control half the world's wealth. I think it's closer to around between 10 and 20%. Although I have seen, I was reading a study like around 2018 or so that was saying that if you actually look at what wealth is in whose hands, American private actors like American multinationals, they control a substantial chunk of the global economy. I think it's like close to 50% of GDP is traceable to an American corporation in some degree or another. But yeah, so I'm sorry, I've been going digression after digression. That's sort of, I always, when we try to understand what's going on, how do we get here? How do we get to confrontation, the risk of nuclear war? That is really the basic. So just my greater point was just that that the CIA-backed coup in Iran in 1953, that is just one example of the U.S. acting in a way to maximize its control over global affairs and the global economy in the post-war period. And that's, get back to your original question, it's like, how did we get here? That's always the starting point. You got to understand like why we're in the Middle East, why we are having overseas presence in the first place. And actually, I don't want to spend too much time looking backwards and not looking at the present moment. But one thing that's really important to understand is that in the post-war, this was very much planned. And that's one thing that when we're talking about government policy, long-term strategic planning isn't always discussed. Like, it's presented to us in the media and academia as the government is just, we're good actors and we're just kind of responding to the world around us spontaneously. We're not in the back, designing anything. But there's a very influential American, foreign policy expert, advisor, diplomat by the name of George Kennan. If you study international relations in college, you're taught to worship the ground that he walks on. And the guy's a genius and everything. He's most famous for writing this thing called the Kennan Telegram, which is basically, laying out the groundwork of the Cold War, essentially saying, the Soviet Union, they're a bunch of psychopaths, bloodthirsty maniacs trying to start war all over the world and expand all over the world with violent revolution and aggression. If we don't stop them, then they're gonna be in Washington tomorrow. Actually, ironically, during World War II, or just prior to World War II, he was stationed in Germany as the American consul in Berlin, and he was encouraging Roosevelt to actually ally with Hitler against the Soviet Union. The guy was, very much arch conservative war hawk. Yeah, kind of a maniac. But anyway, he's credited with this idea of called grand area planning, which, essentially like the U.S. planned for in the post-war period to just divide the world up into grand areas, literally grand areas for our control. And they would serve different purposes in maintaining this system of American control. And part of that was, designing plans for the Middle East, right? And basically an advisor to President Roosevelt, I forget his name, but he wrote a memo that really kind of gives the game away. He says that, Saudi Arabia, they're talking about oil reserves in Saudi Arabia in the Middle East, and the concessions that those governments are giving to foreign states and corporate and companies, to get the oil, refine it, and do the work that they just don't have the infrastructure to do, right? Yeah. He said that Saudi Arabia, what is the quote? It's a stupendous source of strategic power, right? So they have the most plentiful, the cheapest, most easily accessible oil reserves in the world. And of course, at that time, oil, the entire economy revolves around oil. It's the basis of transportation, all that. And so what the thinking in the administration was that, look, whoever controls Middle East oil controls the global economy. And whoever controls the global economy controls the world. So in the Middle East, the core of our policy was cultivating, sort of relationships of dependency with these oil producing states, chief among them, of course, Saudi Arabia, also eventually Kuwait, Iraq, Bahrain, another one, Qatar, the UAE. Basically, this is there's a lot more nuance, and I'm oversimplifying it just for ease of explanation. But basically, the big paradigm of American relations in the oil producing regions is this: we will guarantee the survival of your regimes and the security of your rulers. And in exchange, you are going to take the revenue from your energy sectors and invest it into the Western economy and the American economy. You're going to buy real estate in Manhattan. You're going to invest in American corporations. You're going to get American consultants and buy American weapons, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, just getting the profits, because that's what it all comes down to in the end is money and wealth and power. You guys invest all your money in the American economy. We'll make sure your regimes survive, no matter how horrific or brutal or ass backwards those regimes may be. So that's, that is when you're looking at what's going on in the Middle East right now, you have to start with that. And obviously, like since World War II, since the end of World War II and that period began, a lot has changed. But you really, none of what's happening is going to make sense if you don't start from that square one, basically. And so really, like with the tying it all together, I mean, it's really the history of the Middle East and large parts of the world is just sort of action and reaction, and the U.S. reacting to what it perceives to be threats to its domination. And that's true in the Middle East, that's true in East Asia, that's true in South and Latin America, it's true in Europe. So if you're looking at what's happening today, you have to keep in mind that, it has always been the goal of the United States to, just control, to be top dog on the world. And the Middle East plays a critical role. I mean, a good analogy I use is like, the Middle East and the oil producing regions are to the US what India was to the British Empire. I mean, you take India away, the British were nothing. When they invaded India in the late 18th century, took over slowly through their own military, but also through the British East India Trading Company. They deindustrialized the place, and they basically turned the entire country. They shut down all the factories, all the dry docks, everything, and basically turned it into a giant plantation. And they would all the spices and everything, jewels, precious metals, things like that. They turned it into basically a factory for exporting these raw materials for consumption in their own economies. And so we sort of have obviously it's not a perfect analogy, but our relationship with Saudi Arabia and some of those other oil producing states is kind of similar. They are like the crown jewel of our empire, and they're to a large degree a basis of our power around the globe. And so, there's so many different subjects to touch on here, but that's the basic framework. And there's a lot has obviously happened since World War II in the Middle East. You had the rise of Arab nationalism, Zionism, the rise of the Israeli state, and, countless wars in between. But that, whenever people ask me, like, how do we get here? What's going on? You have to bring it back to that original point. And regrettably, it's a point that you're not allowed to make. It's not something you say in polite society. Well, the United States is an empire, and we're acting, and our rulers are acting in a way to maximize and preserve our power to the greatest extent possible. You can't say that. The line is, we are out in the globe, and we are supporting the development of democracy, free market economies, and human rights. And if you stray from that, you're not taken seriously. But there is a reality. And, if we want to understand reality, you have to look at the facts. And in the Middle East, this is probably these are the most salient points that it's just not going to make sense if you don't understand this. From that core.
When we've seen this example happen throughout history, like you said, like nothing has been at the scale the US is on right now, but we've seen the Roman Empire, we've seen all these empires rise and fall. Their goal of all these empires was to retain and maintain power. That was always the goal, and history repeats itself. So
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good.
one, we didn't really get to touch into the media propaganda aspect of this as well, but an important aspect of that is that not only do these countries behave this way, in their perceived short-term material self-interest, but they also tell themselves and tell the general public that actually we're not doing this to benefit us. This is to help everybody else, right? I mean, like every empire, every powerful entity in history, as far as you can go back, I'm sure that they say similar things. I mean, we know that the British, they had their, they call it the white man's burden. They need to go out in the world and civilize, these poor, Middle Easterners and Asians and Africans. We want to bring them civilization, by, controlling their raw materials and, turning their workforce, basically into a slave workforce and expropriating all their wealth and bringing it back to Europe. We're doing that to help them. The French told themselves the same things. In fact, Nazi Germany said the same thing, like, oh yeah, listen, we're exterminating people in Eastern Europe, but we're doing this to preserve, a German spiritual civilization, and we're just restoring the Slavs and the Jews to their rightful place in society. And the Japanese, they told themselves the same things. They're like, listen, like we are trying to bring about a utopia in an Asia that is sovereign and free from foreign occupation and all this, and we're doing this for you. And America is no different. I mean, we have this idea of American exceptionalism, that we're unique in history and that, we just act not out of self-interest around the world, but just out of benevolence. We're trying to help you. We want to help you develop. We want to spread democracy and human rights and free markets. And we're unique in that respect. And that's a big part of it. And I mean, look, to test the theory out. Actually, if you, a big influence in my, discovering this and getting into it was he's a professor now. He's a legend named by the name of Noam Chomsky. He one of his greatest works. So he's a dissident, a linguist, professor, all of these things. But he wrote this book. I would really recommend to your listeners. There's one book I would recommend that everyone read. It's called Manufacturing Consent. And he co-authored it with another professor by the name of Edward Herman back in, I think the 1970s or 1980s. But it really looks at how the mainstream media and the press, while it's presented as being we're confronting power and holding the government accountable, and we're bringing light to the darkness and rooting out corruption and malfeasance and all this. Well, it's actually quite the opposite. The press acts in a way that benefits concentrations of power and wealth, and the government explicitly. In fact, they rely on the government for scoops and sources and stuff, so that limits like how much they actually challenge policy and discuss it honestly. Because and one of the points he makes is that there are these filters that go into media and academia. For media in particular, it's one is just the profit motive. They're going to run with the stories that make the most money. They're also they're worried about getting flack from special interest groups. Like they're not going to run a story if they think that
to make certain people look bad.
Right, exactly, by certain powerful groups. But and also it's the whole business model. I mean that means the mainstream media. If you consume mainstream media, you read the New York Times, you read the Washington Post, you are the product. The newspaper is not the product. They are selling you to advertisers. That is the business model, right?
Yeah.
And so all of that, all those filters, they limit how the news, how these issues that we're discussing are discussed in public. And it really limits, the things that I'm saying, you couldn't say them if I were to go on CNN. I mean, they would never have me back on. They literally like, they couldn't understand what you were saying. Because in order to climb the ladder and get to places of power and influence, you have to internalize these things and start with these assumptions and work with that framework of, the United States is just, we're spreading democracy and human rights and free markets and that's it. Sometimes we will make the occasional blunder, but it's a mistake with the best intentions. We're not going around the world zapping people because we think it'll be good for, I don't know, Raytheon or Lockheed Martin or something like that. But that's also an important. Sorry, I probably shouldn't have even gotten into this topic because there's just so much to discuss. That in itself is another talk. But that's an important element of this as well.
This is why we got the Adam bomb. That's why we have it here on Conversate to get it raw and unfiltered for you to get the understanding. That's why I've had you on to get the full understanding of what's going on in this world and why things work the way they do. And like you said, and to get to the reality of it, you can form your own opinion on everything else later, but to get to the reality of what's going on in international relations, in politics, and the relationships that we've had with countries overseas and what that actually means. This is exactly why I had you on, and I feel like the listeners got a treat because, and like you said, we have a lot to discuss connected to that. And don't worry, you're gonna be back on for more Conversate. To close out, I do want to ask why, because it's clear that you love this stuff. Why do you love it? Like, what made you fall in love with the history and the workings of these systems to how you are here to just know a breadth of knowledge on this thing? Why do you love it so much?
That's a tough question. I mean, I always was kind of like, from a young age, I was always kind of interested in history and international affairs and just kind of understanding the world around me. I think that's part of it. Is just like I want to get to the bottom of things. I want to know the truth, and I want to know what's, even if I can't change them or affect them, I want to know what's going on. I don't want to be deluded by propaganda or just dig my head in the sand. I feel compelled to like know what's going on. But also, as I've gotten older, you kind of start to see that this stuff has an impact on us. Like, kind of like I was saying earlier towards the beginning of the show, like, listen, if we owe it to ourselves to understand what's going on in the world, because we are morally at least responsible for what our leaders are doing. I mean, we choose to, whatever limited extent, they are responsible to us. They're there representing us. They're doing everything in our name, and we elect them. Again, we can debate as to how, to what degree we do actually elect them, but they're doing all this stuff in our name. So, like, I mean, we owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to the rest of the world's population to understand, first of all, understand what our government is doing, and secondly, act in a way to stop the bad stuff and promote the good stuff. And that's one aspect, but also just, I mean, even just like selfishly looking at how it affects my own life. I mean, listen, if we're at war and we're constantly spending money on the military, I mean, well, that's okay. That affects inflation. That affects the price of goods. That affects interest rates. Then we get into, things like tariffs and trade wars that affects our access to certain markets and our ability to consume certain things, and interact with other personally, commercially, in whatever way you want. So, I mean, this stuff, like, it's easy to look at this, just the world and say, how can I possibly affect this? I mean, this just doesn't matter. I can't change this even if I disagree with it. But, like, I mean, the fact of the matter is that this stuff affects our day-to-day lives in ways that may not be readily apparent to us. And so we owe it to ourselves to, if we want to try and change things, the first step is to understand them and to know what's going on. That's always education is always the first step, no matter what we're talking about. Even if we're talking about strictly domestic issues, you got to inform yourselves. If you don't know what's going on, then, how do you act? How do you organize? How do you agitate? You can't do anything. So for that reason, I mean, I think it's been important for me to understand what was going on. I mean, I'm not an activist by any means. I aspire to in some ways, but it's important. If we want to bring about change, if we want to make progress, genuine progress, you have to understand the world around you. You have to understand what's going on and get to the root of things. Because otherwise we're just not being honest with ourselves, and we're just kind of talking past each other. We got to get to understand what's really happening. What is the root cause of all these things? And that's the most important step in my opinion.
Man, amazing. I was going to have you do a closing argument, but that was a perfect closing argument. And no matter how humble this guy Adam tries to be, clearly this guy is a genius and knows a lot to learn from. That's why he's going to be back on the podcast. But Adam, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate you, man.
So good and so very much needed.
Definitely. No, it needed for me too, because I need an outlet, to talk about this stuff.
Listen, so this is gonna be an outlet. So I know the listeners are gonna be like, "Nah, we need to have him back on," because obviously these things are ever changing and ever going on. So we're definitely gonna need updates. We get more clarity on what's going on. So it's gonna be helpful for the listeners. So yeah. I'm excited for the future.
Definitely. And we got to talk more about Iran. I do all these digressions, but wonder when I come back, we'll get more into
because I see it from a lens of myself where, like, we could just go straight into Iran, but not know any of the background. So you're trying to play catch up in your mind of like, okay, how do we get here? But like, why this matters? Like, it's important to know where these relations start in the first place for us to care about the current situation. So this is a good first foundational laying for everything that's going to be going on moving forward. So no, this is perfect, bro. Perfect.
Thank you. Appreciate you, man.
Appreciate
that means
you
a lot to me.
For sure.
Thank you.
You can Conversate.
All right. Until next time.